On Thursday, Kenya's Finance Ministry unveiled the government's budget for the 2022-2023 fiscal year aimed at reviving the economy. The 3.3 trillion Kenyan shillings budget illustrates the dilemma facing the government. On one hand, to increase Kenya's purchasing power or replenish the government's coffers by raising taxes. Reginald Kadzutu, CEO at Amana Capital, joins us on a deeper conversation on this with focus on financing. Reginald, it's great having you with us today on the show. Thank you so much for making the time. We're seeing on one hand to increase Kenyans' purchasing power, on the other hand, replenish the government's coffers, basing off the budget readings from last week on Thursday. Which side did the government really weigh most on?
I think the government finds itself in the outgoing government finds itself in between a rock and a hard place because of the amount of debt repayment that they have to pay. And they have to fund that debt repayment. And the only way of doing that is to, one, increase taxes, or also borrow more. So if you look at the 3.3 trillion budget that was read out last week, 1.3 trillion, or close to 45% of that budget, is going to debt repayment, both interest and principal payment. And the only remaining 55% is now being shared between recurrent development and the transfers to counties. So there was no other way of funding this budget apart from him, that's the CS, having to increase the taxes. And the only way of doing that was to go to the broadest taxes that he could get. Because when an economy where income is reducing, people are losing jobs, businesses are not growing, so he's not going to get much from his traditional source of income tax or income on profits and salaries and all. So he now has to look at the indirect taxes, which is VAT, excess duty, which cover a larger portion of the working population.
And Reginald, who will pay really the biggest taxes? We're seeing the theme for this budget is accelerating economic recovery for improved livelihoods. But will it in reality have that impact? Will it be mirrored down to the economy?
No, the Kenya has had a bunch of aimless budgets, and this is just one of those budgets, an aimless budget and empty statements made by the CS of Treasury. If you look at the numbers and look where the money is being spent, we are not seeing any money that will actually help the one output to grow, aggregate demand to grow, or job creation in this budget. And one thing that we also need to understand is that budgets do not have an immediate effect. So this budget, we do not expect to see an effect immediately. Budgets normally have a long-term effect as they seep through. So you'll find what happens this year might have an impact 3 years, 4 years from now. But they need to have that aim. They need to know what they're aiming at to change. And some of the variables I've given you is normally output, demand, employment, growth in income. So when people look at a budget and they're expecting maybe a budget to reduce cost of living, that's not the tool of a budget. The budget doesn't come to reduce the cost of living, because a budget is expenditure. It's actually inflationary in nature. It is never deflationary in nature. In this case, because of the shrinking economy, people that will suffer the most when it comes to this budget in the short term and also going in the long term will be the general populace, especially on the food areas where they have removed certain basic commodities from zero rating, meaning that they can now be actually charged VAT, things like maize meal, things like flour for making bread, and just basic commodities. And why does he have to do that when you have 75 to 80% of your economy informal? Formal taxations like income tax will not generate the revenue that they currently need. So you have to go to indirect taxes where everyone is going to be able to pay taxes. So if you are limited to income taxes only, then he was not going to be able to increase his tax revenue, because their target is 2.1 trillion. So they just have to go to a tax that affects everyone. Is it progressive? No, it is not progressive, but it's regressive, because then a person who earns 1 million shillings and a person who earns 5,000 shillings will all pay, if it's 8% VAT on bread, will all pay the same 8% VAT on bread. So the general populace will suffer if the finance bill goes through as is.
Yeah, we're seeing the government is saying that they are focusing on economic recovery. On one hand, you're saying the public has been feeling the pinch, looking at everything that is happening globally. Inflation has also been rising. The hope really is they're relying on the government, but yet we're seeing everything that the government is doing will still impact the public in a negative way. So the question is, then, this budget, who is it really for? If not to protect the public from the inflation and everything that is happening?
A budget it forms part of the fiscal tools that a government have. Yeah, so you have the expenditure side, which is the budget, and you have taxation side, which is raising finances, which both of them combined gives you what we call fiscal policy. Now, the aim of a fiscal policy is what they want to shape the country into become. So if they want it to be a manufacturing hub, if they want to increase value addition in agriculture, or they want to have be able to export services by educating the population so well, you will see that in the budget as long-term goals and targets. So as I mentioned earlier, you cannot use a budget to control inflation now. So for example, oil prices are going up. And you cannot use a budget to control oil prices. Food prices are going up, not because of fundamental issues in the economy. They are going up because global food prices are going up. Again, you cannot use a budget for doing that, because the budget will not have an immediate impact. It will have a long-term impact. But if they then make a budget forced by populace or general trying to appease everyone and make a budget that says, yes, we are cutting taxes on this, we are reducing, the impact of that, the short-term impact of that ends up creating a crisis, which then the next budget they try to sort out that crisis. So you find you end up in a hamster economy where there's activity but no progress. And that has been the problem that we've been having with our Kenyan budgets. We have a lot of activity, a lot of things, a voluminous document, but no progress towards a certain goal. Why? Because the goal itself is what is actually missing.